Welcome to Next Round with me, Dale McDermott.
And me, David W. Higgins.
A young Irish look at the economy, politics and society.
Covering home and abroad.
For the thinkers, the dreamers and the doers, this is Next Round. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Next Round. Today, three main things we want to cover with the general election well underway and 2 days left until polling. There's been a lot of movement in the last week with respect to opinion polls as well. So we want to have a look at that. Three main party leaders had a debate last night. The final one held by RTE. And we want to do a bit of forward looking to see how we think the election may pan out in the coming days. Also, Fine Gael during the campaign launched its Acorn Savings Account policy. This is a policy aimed at directing savings towards every child in Ireland. So I want to talk about that. And also a recent study by Women's Aid in collaboration with CORE reveals that about 40% of Irish men hold traditionalist views with respect to masculinity. So we want to talk about that as well. If you do like this podcast, please share and subscribe. We're available on all major podcast platforms and also available on YouTube where you can watch and subscribe to our channel there. David, good to see you. We haven't connected in a little while. I know it's been we've been creating lots of content in the last couple of weeks, and I know we want to just take a little bit of a pause, but it's been a pretty busy time since we last spoke. And of course, the Irish general election is well underway. And in the last week, the latest Irish Times Ipsos opinion poll showed some movement. I know people always say that in the last week of the campaign, people start to really focus and wake up. And that is certainly the case. And there's been lots of shift between voters and their opinion poll preferences. Fine Gael has had a notable decline, dropping 6 points down to 19%, and is now placing third behind Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin. Fianna Fáil up 2 points to 21%. Sinn Féin has seen a slight increase, reaching 20%, and support for independence has also grown as well to 20%. So we're seeing a lot of movement happening here. And of course, all of this is in the aftermath last night of the last leaders' debate, where Micheál Martin, Taoiseach Simon Harris, and the Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou McDonald had their debate. And some quick reactions. I feel that there was no killer blow. I thought some decent sound bites from all three. I thought Mary Lou McDonald being in the middle actually worked pretty well. Even from a stage managing perspective, she had the ability to pan left, pan right to Simon Harris and Micheál Martin. But what?
Yeah, she did. She did the Tweedledum Tweedledee
right,
thing
again,
which even Simon Harris was quick to jump in and say that was, do you have any new material after 5 years? But funny, I actually thought the opposite. I thought it could have been that if the two Fine Gael Fianna Fáil leaders were together, then it actually would have been just as easy for Mary Lou McDonald to say, well, look, these two over here are in one corner and I'm over here in a very different corner. So actually, I was actually surprised that the three-way was agreed to by Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in the first place.
Why
do I say that? So I thought going into this campaign that the two main leaders would want a 10-way or a larger scope of parties to actually neutralise the idea that Sinn Féin are a potential leader of the next government. That's what I thought would happen. That one of the two party leaders would come out and say, look, no, we're not doing three ways. We need to do a wider group. Let's have a wider set of views.
Yeah.
And that would actually dilute Sinn Féin. But I think part of the reason that they've gone ahead with three-way was that polling pretty consistently shows a big drop in Sinn Féin support. And none of the two main leaders saw Mary Lou really is a threat anymore.
Yeah, but I suppose, like, did they really have a choice to not do it? I mean, Sinn Féin are neck and neck with them, more or less, on and also in terms of seats, right? Like, I think it is credible that some formation could lead to Mary Lou McDonald being Taoiseach or indeed even Taoiseach if that were to be the case. And we can talk about coalition formation later on, but it's an interesting one, and like I think as well. I'm not sure, David, if you agree with this, but I find the style to be so combative. I'm not sure if you picked up on this, but kind of how the presenters kind of pose questions, and it just feels so negative. Did you get that sense?
I always find that it's quite, you don't have much time to get your answer in.
Yeah.
So you have to be quick. I do find that that's a bit more of a wider trend in all media.
Yeah.
I always contrast this a bit to the UK, where I find that the combativeness is even at a higher level. I do remember once watching there was an episode where Primetime and the Nolan show in Northern Ireland did a collaboration show. And Nolan gave this really sharp question to a government minister, and the guy was like a deer in headlights. And that can be because Northern Ireland and British politics is that
yeah, well,
even
tabloid.
Even more stronger. But I guess the reaction that I gave to the debate last night was that, look, you have to get your answers in quick, but also there was a bit of back and forth. So there's one moment where Sarah McInerney was saying to Micheál Martin, look, you need to give an answer about the future here, not talk about the past. And Micheál Martin really strongly pushed back and said, no, sorry now, I am going to talk about housing in the context of where we've come from and where we're going, and I'm entitled to my opinion, was the response back. So there was some sharpness in the responses as well as from the questions being posed.
Yeah, and I think that's that's just how politics is nowadays. But I mean, the bigger question is, will this make any difference at all in the final days? I think there was no knockout again. There was no major blow. At one point, I think, when it came to the housing question and housing policy, Mary Lou definitely was up for scrutiny with respect to would her housing policies be acceptable to the banks, and therefore would they lend them to consumers? And that is still a question mark. And I think in a three-way debate, they were able to spend a lot more time scrutinizing that. And I think at times she may have come across a little bit uncertain and not fully attached to the brief, might be the perspective. But at the same time, I think she was able to, I think, successfully cast herself as quite different. I think she was, especially on mental health, I thought she actually came across quite well on that too.
Oh yeah, that was one of her strongest replies was on that. But it also led, I think, Harris to come back with quite a strong reply too. By the final weekend of a campaign, which we've already passed, a good chunk of voters have already made up their minds.
Yeah.
It's not to say that a debate like this won't have an impact. It's just that you're running out of time for it to have an impact.
And you kind of don't want to screw up. Like I think if you screwed up big time, it would be shared on social media and seen by everyone. But it's almost like going through it but not failing is almost a success in its own right.
Yeah, and I got a certain sense of Harris, in a way, playing things safe. I mean, one feature of his responses was to just acknowledge the question. It's a very North American thing, Dale, that you'll be familiar with. Oh, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
It was a really good question. And then to answer it. And he gave comprehensive answers
to answer
it all.
2 minutes later.
Yeah. Look, and every politician has their way of winding themselves to the answer. But there was a bit of that going on from Harris. I think, like, the big movements that are notable in the polls are, of course, the decline in Fine Gael support from a higher point, from a level that was in a way elevated. So after Harris came in 7 months ago, Fine Gael support peaked a bit higher, and it looks like it's pulling down a bit lower. The real question, I think, will come down to how transfers go. So where that Irish Times poll shows basically the three parties neck and neck around 20%. Possible that because you'll have strong transfers between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, that you will end up with both parties marginally higher than Sinn Féin on seats. But then the counterpoint to that is that you have a lot of opposition parties that may also transfer to Sinn Féin a bit more favourably and give them a leg up too. I mean, the outcome that it looks like we're heading to is one that I've been ballpark talking about for blue in the face for the past 5 years now, which is that we're going Dutch, that we're going to end up with no one party having more than a quarter of the vote share or a quarter of the seats in Parliament, which means you're going to need at least three groups going into coalition, and it could be a very unwieldy group of 4 or 5 parties, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, plus Labour, Soc Dem, or a bunch of independents, and it could be quite difficult to form it, let alone hold it together.
And the Ireland Votes election forecast have been following that model, and the latest one is they think Fianna Fáil 40 seats, Sinn Féin 39, and Fine Gael 35. Fine Gael, of course, have that challenge of a majority are new candidates, are not sitting TDs, and mathematically they kind of needed to get that Harris bump and maintain it in order to have that transfer into seat number. And I think they're in danger territory now, where when they're scrapping for the final seats, they just might not get them.
Yes, I agree with that, and that is evident in some polls we've had from TG Ceathair.
Yes.
So TG Ceathair are great. They've done 4 constituency polls in Gaeltacht areas, giving us a read on Donegal, Mayo, Galway West, and Kerry.
Kerry, yeah.
And the 2 ones that stand out to me are the Galway West and Donegal ones. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they're examples of where, let's say Galway West no longer has Eamon O'Queeve of Fianna Fáil running. And instead you have Gráinne Seoga and another candidate. And what you have there is a big shift away from Fianna Fáil towards Fine Gael, towards Hilda Nocton and Sean Kine, who are 2 incumbents, Senator and TD, who are still on the ticket. But then go to Donegal and you have the reverses happening. So Fianna Fáil has strong incumbents, McConnell Oak and Pat Gope Gallagher, who's coming back from retirement to run. But then on the Fine Gael side, you have McHugh is not running, and then you have 2 new faces who are on the ticket. And there's actually a movement of votes away from Fine Gael towards Fianna Fáil. So it tells me that because Fine Gael has more retirements, that it will fare a bit worse than Fianna Fáil on first preferences. But then coming down to actually seats allocated because of transfers between the 2 parties, it could notch a bit back in Fine Gael's favour. But the starting point is a little more. So I guess if I say, who gets the most number of seats, I would say Fianna Fáil, then closely followed by Fine Gael, and then a bit of a leg lower to Sinn Féin, but not huge. You're talking about single seat differences here.
The other thing noticeable as well, I think, in the final part of the campaign was this shift into really focusing on economic stability, and enterprise kept coming out as the word, I think, of the debate last night. But and this, of course, in the shadow of US President-elect Donald Trump announcing his intention to put tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, but in particular Canada, one of its closest ally, and shares the longest unmanned border in the world, and this kind of brings us to the point where we're moving into a real sense of unpredictability in global politics, and how that's going to affect economies globally, and how basically I think the narrative is shifting. And I think Fine Gael are going to really push for this, which is we need people at the table who have experience and have the ability to communicate and engage with a government in the US that is possibly not going to be quite as favourable to Ireland as it has been in the past. And that's where that experience at large multilateral institutions like the Eurogroup, having people like Pascal Donoghue is going to be, at least in their view, important. But I did notice Mary Lou's combat to that yesterday was around, the whole idea of being very doom and gloom and being negative is actually premature, and you need to go in and engage with them in a bit of a different sense. So I actually thought her response was actually pretty mature in her own right, and I actually didn't expect it from from Sinn Féin.
Yeah, there's always this tendency of parties wanting to try and elevate certain issues up the issues of priority in the election campaign. I think back to the last election cycle where there was an attempt by Fine Gael to elevate Brexit, try and make that a bigger issue than it was. And there's a small flavour of that now by putting out Pascal Donoghue talking about stability and all that. I think you really have to talk about what the key issues are. And actually, if even the election of Trump doesn't tilt the minds of voters towards thinking that the economy and stability are actually key election issues, unless that happens, it's not so wise, I think, to try and turn the tables when people probably won't. Why do I say this? When polling was done by that Irish Times poll, shows that 1 in 3 voters still see cost of living as being the low one, the one that's likely to influence your vote. And that was a key question in the wording. So some polls will ask, what do you think is an issue kind of that is in the news or it's getting your attention? But this one was, what will influence you to vote? 1 in 3 saying cost of living. And then if you add in house prices, which was the second largest response, that covers half of voters. So half of voters are being led by those issues. And actually, it was quite unfortunate that cost of living came a little later, or I say unfortunate for Simon Harris, because that when he answered that question, I think that was one of his strongest responses, where he was able to give about 4 or 5 points about how in the Fine Gael manifesto he alleges that there's ways of actually addressing cost of living, things like cutting student fees, things like cutting the VAT rate. Now, again, I'm not so sure that the VAT rate actually helps consumer prices. I think it might make some businesses survive. But point being, he had a number of kind of key points ready to go to talk about that issue. And then that's maybe a point back to the presenters of the show. We've had 2 debates where cost of living and house prices were not the first topic being discussed on the debates. So in the 10 way, the first thing they talked about was coalition pairings. And this is where Patrick Tobita was able to shine and say, guys, none of these are answering the question. We've been 10 minutes about this. And it's
on that point, it's like the debate is about policy and should be about policy. We don't spend the first half an hour talking about coalition opposites. No one really cares.
Yeah. And then you ended up with housing cost of living towards the end of this primetime one as well. And it because they led at the start of the debate with the Can-Turk engagement, which is the kind of
the hiccups of a campaign, but that's not about policy, you know?
No. So I think many viewers of those debates might have gone away from them, may not have stayed tuned in. A lot of ad break. There was a good stretch before ad breaks, but these key issues didn't come until the second or third half of these ones. So look, we're gonna have to wait and see how this comes out. Like I expect that again, because we don't count votes until the Saturday, and because some of these final 4th or 5th seats in certain constituencies will take a while, it's going to be Sunday before you have final numbers to know, for example, whether Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil are the larger party, and a sense of will they need to go in with 1 or 2 smaller parties or 10 independents or 20 independents. That kind of question won't be clear from an exit poll or even from the first preference on Saturday. It's going to be Sunday when we actually have the full picture of the next stall.
20 independents doesn't exactly inspire confidence of stability, but
no, it's a lot of road projects. Like there's only 40 constituencies.
Infrastructure.
You're gonna have to build, you're gonna have to build a lot of quote unquote infrastructure through a lot of those.
That new Department of Infrastructure will be pretty busy, I think, with campaign.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to be an official working in that. Yeah.
Very funny. Okay, with that, let's move on to the next piece I want to chat about, which was, again, related to the campaign. Fine Gael, during the campaign, announced its Acorn Savings Account policy, which, again, is aiming to establish a savings foundation for every child born in Ireland. Under the scheme, the state will contribute €1,000 to a savings account for each newborn, with an increased contribution of €1,500 for children from lower income families. Parents are encouraged then to make additional contributions as well. It's meant to grow, and then of course, by the time the child reaches 18, there's a nice little fund for them there. So I know, David, look, we've spoken on this podcast about the birth rate and policies that countries across the world have used to kind of support families, support children, and kind of get that rate coming up. So I know this is something we want to talk about today. So what are your thoughts on this policy?
Okay, so I think what's worth focusing on is how this scheme could actually be tweaked. So the Fine Gael manifesto talks about it as putting €1,000 in an account when a child is born that would accrue about 4% each year, compounded, and then at age 18 you would receive the money. If you are a child receiving child support, if your parents are receiving child support payments, the starting amount would be $1,500, and that would accrue over the term to about $3,000. So you end up kind of doubling your money with this scheme. But the key differentiator is that parents could then top up the fund, so you can add in $2,000 per year, and you may end up as you turn 18 receiving over €50,000. Now, there's been some reaction to this to say that is actually perpetuating inequality, which I think is an unfair critique of it. The claim being that because certain parents have the money to put the $2,000 in for their children each year, that those that do will actually only see their wealth grow larger, and those that don't will only get the basic $2,000 or $3,000 that would accrue in the account. But I think that the parameters worth focusing on are that 4% is great if you're putting it in a savings account, but if you were to have this managed in the wider stock market, you could be talking about 6 or 8% returns, where you could end up with your 1,000 coming out as being 4,000 by time you are 18. That would be a really good thing to see. That, by the way, is what we're about to do with the two investment funds that Ireland is setting up. We're going to have them being managed by investment managers who go off and invest them into a range of products, like Norway does with its sovereign wealth fund, for example. And the other parameter is that not just a child receiving this at 18, what if you could continue for the fund to invest, and that it would then be used towards a house deposit when you are in your 20s. I think that could be a really I think it could be a fantastic way of building up housing. I think it would build up housing deposits for a lot of children. It would be a way of parents to gradually help pay for their kids' deposit, and they wouldn't be at risk of clashing with some inheritance tax or gift rules and that kind of thing, because you do gradually. You would do it over the number of years. I guess the drawbacks to the scheme are that the UK had a scheme like this during the New Labour era, and it was the first thing that was cut when the crash came along. And
this is the Child Trust Fund, right?
Yeah, and that scheme was axed. This was put to Simon Harris during the debate last night. If there's a downturn, if the corporate tax money runs out, are you going to slash that scheme as being the first one to go? And the other problem with the UK scheme is that because it was slashed, people forgot about it. And then there are kids now who have some money in those accounts when they turn 18 and they don't know about them. And there's actually an industry that's cropped up around reminding people, hey, you got some money in here. Let's give us a small fee and we'll help you find the account and get your money back. That isn't an ideal situation. So you would need to, I guess, you would need to put some mechanisms in place that regular reminders are going out to people that these schemes exist, that parents should top up, that the kids, when they turn 18, hey, this is available to you now, and that if any downturn comes along, that the scheme wouldn't be axed entirely, and maybe it would just be notched lower, and maybe some other ways to make savings on it would be done.
In the UK, so they also have a thing called the Junior ISA, which is it allows parents to set aside and save on behalf of their kids. But I think it's 9,000 a year, I think, per kid. And it allows you to invest wherever you like. It can be in the stock market, it can be shares, whatever, tax-free, and it can grow up until the child is 18, when it becomes theirs, and you can go forward from there. And I think that's a policy which allows it allows people to, one, manage it more accordingly themselves. The state doesn't need to do it for them. And two, get a better return. As you said at the start, David, like a 4% return, to me, isn't that great? Especially when we're battling the era of high inflation. 4% isn't really good enough. And you want to be getting returns higher, closer towards 10% if you can. And of course, that compounded over the course of 18 years can be pretty important. So I think, one of my reactions was, and we've spoken about this before, which is the psychology behind countries like with the likes of Ireland versus the UK versus the US, and how invested and understood and engaged the population is with investing and with investing in equities. Because, as we know, only about a third of Ireland are actually exposed to the stock market in some way, shape, or form, compared to the US, which is way higher, closer towards 2/3 of the population. And I think this is a policy where it's a good start, but I think some tweaking would have been beneficial, I think, and could actually take a leaf out of the UK's book on this.
Yeah, and the point I think you're getting at is the idea of financial literacy.
Yes.
That if young people have an account that is growing each year and that you can see the number, because I think anyone who's had a measly credit union account or anything small over their childhood years,
it's harsh on the credit unions, David.
No, yeah, well, I mean a measly sum, not in a measly credit union. Oh gosh, I've insulted. Yeah, no. Anyway, we're going to keep this in, Dale.
Yes, this is not a cut.
Yeah. So those small amounts are things that people check.
Yeah.
So your confirmation, your communion money, goes in, and you keep an eye on it. If you're keeping an eye on a number that is increasing and that is being affected by a good year of the stock market or a bad year, it may lead people, at least some people, to actually go in and ask why. Why is my account going up? And that could be, it could tap into a lot of teenage curiosity that's there. I think that could be quite healthy. So I'd hope that a scheme like that, if it's done with a right, because back in the in the 2000s when New Labour did this, that was back before you had internet platforms, you could log in and see the number. There's tools now that could be really leveraged to lean on that financial literacy point that could really make this quite a good scheme for young people.
And it's tied to the democratization of finance in general. And again, to your point, like platforms, digital platforms and financing platforms that allow people now to just have way more accessibility and access to investing, both in Ireland, Europe, and of course further afield. I think this has a lot of potential. I think they're getting at something here, and of course it ties to, again, how do we support young families, think about the future, plan for the future, support costs of going to university, costs of getting of that first deposit, and again, just being a lot more forward thinking on financial planning is a good thing, but I think it should be tweaked in some ways. So, okay.
Yeah, agree with you there.
And then let's turn to the other piece, which is the recent study by Women's Aid in collaboration with CORE reveals that about 40% of Irish men hold traditionalist views on masculinity. So the research, which had about 1,000 people in it, indicates that these men are more likely to be in their 20s and being influenced by online figures promoting conventional masculine roles. So just some key findings that came from the study: about 70% believe women's issues are exaggerated. 52% agree or are uncertain that men who don't dominate in relationships aren't real men. 54% concur or are unsure that a man's worth is measured by power and control over others. And 46% think real men shouldn't have to care about women's opinions or feelings. So, I find this is alarming to me, David, and it's something which I have seen, particularly in the last month, actually, on platforms like X, the promotion of the likes of Andrew Tate, and these views becoming more and more pronounced and public. Curious to get your thoughts on this research.
Yeah, so there are some troubling points within this. I think the one of the more troubling questions question was men should use violence to get respect if necessary. 15% of respondents said they agreed or were unsure about that. So that's 18% for men and 12% for women. So women were asked these questions too. Women came a notch lower on all of them, but there was a traditional a kind of women's attitude within this as well, where women hold kind of attitudes about the men in their lives that are also kind of speaking towards traditional. But I actually take a huge issue with this whole split of it being traditionalist men and moderate men. These were the two camps that this survey kind of bucketed the responses into. The first problem I have is that it's actually grouping responses that say that agree with a statement and those who are unsure. So if you're unsure about using violence for respect, or there was, guys should act strong even if scared, for example, you could be unsure on that and you get bucketed under the traditionalist camp. There was the survey group core. They aren't making the data available to actually see the split of agree and unsure. But I still think even being unsure is worth talking about. I don't want to deter from the alarming response that you have to this. I have some alarming responses to these data points as well. But I think that grouping men into just being two camps, traditionalist or moderate, is a bit unhelpful, because I think that within the traditionalist group, there's probably different flavors. So the likes of Andrew Tate, and Tate has had this horrific response to the McGregor case, where he said that it was a bullshit ruling. He said women sleep with rich men, and if that man doesn't fund their life afterwards, the women lie and sue, which is an absolutely horrific way of turning basically. That you could basically, it's basically an open season for someone to commit sexual assault and rape and not have any consequences for it. Tate says it's a dangerous precedent and it's, quote, impossible to be a man in the Western world. I mean, one of the responses to this just says it all for me. Maybe don't touch your women, stay loyal to your wife. And that to me actually speaks to there being a different strand of traditionalist men, which is that there is a tradition around being loyal to one woman by not committing these kinds of infidelities. There's a traditionalism around some of the questions that are in this survey, things like being the main provider and protector. And I think the provide protect strand of more traditionalist male attitudes comes with a risk. So, someone might see the violence question, the acting strong if scared, and see a kind of a wanting to stand up in their lives and would respond with agreement or being unsure to that question. And then because you are kind of in favor of those traditionalist outlooks, you end up bucketed under this traditionalist camp, which includes the violent Andrew Tate folk. There was a book that I read this year. It was called Get Married. And it's written by a kind of more traditionalist attitude coming from the kind of more conservative side of the United States. But the first paragraph, the first page of the book admonishes Andrew Tate and says, these guys are actually not what conservative outlooks on kind of male standing in society should be. Here's the other way. So I think there's more camps than the survey would suggest.
Yeah. I hear you on the differentiating between traditionalists who are without criminality, to be quite frank about it, actually. So I hear you on how they're bucketing it together. But the question is, how do you separate that then, David? Because this bucketing that's happening is, again, you can see it in the survey here, but it is a real challenge. And I think then just on my first point, which is around the likes of Andrew Tate, I was talking to one of my colleagues recently about this, and she was saying, in terms of her daughter, who's, again, she's young, she's in school, early teens, And kind of some of the stuff that she has to come up against with respect to young men who are in her class, again, who are looking up to the likes of Andrew Tate. And it's kind of terrifying. Kind of some of the stuff that these young boys are admiring.
I was shocked. One of the questions of the survey was that men don't need to care about women's opinions or feelings. I think that was a 46% red flag question. Now, just to say, that's 46% of the traditionalists.
Yes.
Now, that's not to say it's not big, but it's actually, you could then say a majority of traditionalist men do care about women's feelings. Now, look, it's on a fine line. Barely, but we also don't know where the unsure responses are, because this survey doesn't reveal them.
But now, again, but just on the unsure thing, like I think like to me that's a clear cut.
Yes.
If you're unsure about that, you're basically not in favor.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of saying, look, that's the kind of the Tate world traditionalists. That question does reveal it for sure. But okay, my problem with this is the questions that it doesn't ask.
Yeah.
What further questions could have been asked that would have given you a better ability to group men into 2, maybe 3 groups? Asking about relationships and commitment. Do you ultimately see yourself being married, loyal to one woman for the rest of your life, raising kids with them? That wouldn't cover every man, but let's see what that response would be. The question of earning more money in a relationship, there's a nuance to that, because it's the whole theme of provide, which men tend to steer themselves quite strongly towards. Okay, you could ask it this way: if in a case of financial difficulty, it's the primary responsibility for me to step up and fill the gap in the family households, finances, something like that. And then you would get probably stronger responses. That might be a way of better distinguishing it too. I just think there's a whole bunch of other questions that could have been asked that would have revealed third camp.
Yeah. And I definitely hear you on kind of the differentiating factor of how do you kind of split it. But I think so some responses should be more clear cut, I think, where if you're not being clear cut and that you're basically against it is my point. But on the nuance of some of the questions, I hear you on that. But it's a topic, David, which is, I think, becoming more and more surfaced. And yeah, I don't know. Platforms like X are I've just noticed that, particularly in the last month, I'm seeing more and more of these really extreme, hardline perspectives on gender and gender roles, and but also like how they almost like just totally dismissing women and their kind of role and function in society. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and there's also a strand of that where those opinions come from women. So there's even a smaller cohort.
I've seen some of this too on X in particular as well.
Yeah, so you'll occasionally see some woman who says, "Look, giving women the right to vote was a bad idea. I just want my husband to vote, and that could be the vote for the household," or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but that kind of thing is quite unusual to see. There is a whole cohort, there's a whole corner of the internet devoted to the kind of the trad wife trend, which is the idea that women want a more traditionalist household where they do the cooking, cleaning, and that work, and the husband goes out to do the work in the economy, so to speak. But the way that the trad wife trend is presented, it's just TikToks about cooking and cleaning and all of that.
Yeah, it's an interesting. We think we've come so far as a society, but I always recall this, which I learned the more recent part of my life, which was a country like Switzerland that you think is progressive and forward-thinking and European-centric, etc. Women only got the right to vote in Switzerland in the mid-70s, and that was again by referendum. That barely passed. I think it was like 50.001% to whatever. I think we think we've come so far, but I think there's a lot of people who hold overly traditional views, I would say, David, that are not in keeping with where we need to go.
Yeah. I might finish this by just talking about where there were questions in the survey which I think are worth saying that both groups, the traditionalists and the moderates, had majority support for. So one was, if a man sees another man acting aggressively towards a woman, he should intervene. That was 66% among the traditionalists and 79% among the moderates. Men should speak up when they witness sexist behaviour, even if it's uncomfortable. Majorities in both, 61% amongst the traditionalists and 85% from the moderates. And a man who stays silent when witnessing discrimination against a woman is complicit in it. 53% amongst the traditionalists, 65% amongst the moderates.
It's funny.
So those are...
Sure. But I would say as well, so we're saying like those who are silent are complicit. I would say those who are not sure about whether we should care about women's feelings or opinions, they're also complicit.
Yeah. No, that's fair as well. Yeah.
On that note, okay, so if you did like our podcast this week, everyone, as we are just out of time, please like, share, and subscribe. We're available on all major podcast platforms. Of course, also available on YouTube, where you can like our channel and subscribe to it there as well. We have D-Day this Friday, and next week's episode will be giving an analysis and a debrief on the Irish election and some other topics as well. But thanks for watching and listening this week, and look forward to seeing you then. Take care.